No, don't do that. Okay, hi everyone. We are here live streaming for the no thank you. So we're here live streaming for the circulatory respiratory quiz. I think some of you just joined us. Hi Ronit. We have many visitors. So let me turn that on. It's okay. Oh, thank you. Okay. No, thank you. Okay. So girls, you're gonna exit now, right? Okay. Okay, have Sammy help you put it on. Thank you. Okay. Okay, so as a reminder for students who are here watching, number one, the quiz will cover respiratory and circulatory. Hi, everyone. Respiratory and circulatory systems for my students. Mr. H's students also need to know expiratory system, but mine do not. So just be clear on that. I'm still happy to answer expiratory systems questions, but I want to make sure that my students know that they don't need to know it for their quiz tomorrow. Okay. All right. So go ahead and hopefully we don't have too many small distractions from my little ones. I'm not a little one. Thank you, Gina. But go ahead and ask whatever questions you have, and we'll just answer them. Remember also, we have the review sheet that I put onto Google Classroom. And then for those of you who didn't see it, I put the answer key up yesterday. So the answer key is there as well to help you. Okay, hello. All right, so questions. When is the, okay, good question. So remember, the diaphragm is that muscle that lies at the base of your thoracic cavity. It separates your thoracic and abdominal cavities. And I think one of the most common things that people make a mistake about is because when the diaphragm's normally like a dome shape, and that's actually when it's relaxed, right? So if it's dome shaped, it's relaxed. And then when you contract your diaphragm, you actually flatten it. By flatten it, you end up now with more space in your thoracic cavity. With more space in your thoracic cavity, the air pressure goes down because you have more space for the same amount of air. So that's why you inhale, because air is now going from the outside in, from high pressure into lower pressure, right? And then when you exhale, it's the opposite. When you exhale, what happens is the diaphragm now relaxes. It goes back to its dome shape. So now your thoracic cavity is smaller, but you had the same amount of air again in there when it did that. So now the pressure increases, and now the air is forced out, going from high inside to low outside. John is asking, what are the bigger versions of the bronchioles called? Those are called the bronchi. So essentially you have your trachea in the middle, and it's going to branch off into the right and left bronchus, which are the bigger tubes, and then the bronchi, which is the plural, branch off into the bronchioles. And so essentially I always think of it as like an upside down tree, right? If you think about your airways as like an upside down tree, the trachea is like the trunk of your tree, and then the bronchi are like the big branches, and then the bronchioles are the smaller branches. Okay, so Gianty, can I explain the lymphatic system and how it's connected to some of those? Yes, I can. And that actually kind of leads right into Anita's question, which is three systems are interacting, but they're connected, right? So the lymphatic system is, I always think of it as like alternate highway compared to your circulatory system. And it does a lot of different things. First of all, the fluid that's flowing in your lymphatic system is not the same as your blood, but it's similar, right? I mean, the lymph, it has no blood. It will sometimes have white blood cells, and it's called lymph. So it's probably most similar, I guess I would say, to the plasma in your blood. And essentially what's going to happen is lots of different things. Like number one, you're going to, it filters your blood. Part of that is the action of those white blood cells, right? They're kind of bringing things out. It's also providing sort of like a balance between your circulatory system. Like if there's too much fluid or not enough, like fluid can flow between the two. So the lymphatic system really has a lot of connections then, right? It's mostly connected to your circulatory system. It's also connected to your immune system. It's also going to be connected to your digestive system, in the sense that when you digest the biomolecules, specifically your fats, are going to go in through your lacteals, which are lymphatic vessels. And then ultimately those lymphatic vessels will dump into your circulatory system to rejoin those other biomolecules. So I always think of them as sort of, so they filter blood, and other body fluids. They help sort of balance things out, and that would affect things like blood pressure as well. Yes, I need you to know the lymphatic system in the context that I put it. Like when I lectured about it, when I talked about like the circulatory system, like that's the extent to which. So only as much as you see it in those lectures. That's it. So, and then coming to Anita's question about 3 systems that interact with the circulatory system. So the lymphatic system is one. The respiratory system would be another one, right? Because there's a very close association with your alveoli and the lung capillaries, because that's how you get the into your blood that you then take to your cells. And then I would say the last system I would directly, easily, well, so actually there's several systems, right? You could say excretory as well, because that's how your blood gets cleaned out. You could also say digestive, because that is how you get you get the nutrients from your digestive system and you send them through your circulatory system. What's the difference between the left and right atrium and the ventricles? So let's start left and right side first, right? On the right side of your heart, it is deoxygenated or oxygen poor blood, meaning it's blood that's coming from your body. It's already given up its oxygen and it's now ready to go to the lungs and get more oxygen. Whereas on your left side of your heart, because from the right side, it's now going to go to your lungs, get oxygen, then go back to your left side. So the blood that's going into your left side of your heart is actually oxygenated or oxygen rich. And then it's going to now pump to their body to deliver all that oxygen. So I would say a really simple way of looking at the differences would be right side is deep oxygen poor, left side is oxygen rich. In terms of the atrium and the ventricles, they're like the upper chambers or the lower chambers, right? So the upper chambers receive the blood from outside the heart, and then the ventricles are the ones that are pumping the blood out, either to the lungs on the right or the body on the left. So that would say that's sort of the main differences. Technically, the left ventricles, because it has to pump to the whole of your body, is actually the most muscular part of your heart, but that's not something I need you to know. Can I explain red blood cells, white blood cells, and plasma? Yes, absolutely. So so let's see. So essentially your blood, right, when we look at it, it looks like this reddish fluid. But if we were to separate or centrifuge out the different sections of your blood, what we would see is we would see cells, and then we would see the liquid portion, right? And the cellular portion is your red blood cells and your white blood cells. Red blood cells are the ones that carry oxygen. White blood cells are for immune system function, which we're going to talk about more next week. And then the plasma is the liquid, which is the non-cellular portion, which contains things like antibodies, but also proteins, things like that. And so essentially what Shreyas you're asking about is essentially the components of blood. A lymph node is sort of like a little rest stop in your lymphatic system. Simply put, you have lymphatic vessels, which are like tubes that the lymph flows through. And there are these places where they kind of dead end into what we call lymph nodes. And living in your lymph nodes are white blood cells. So that's how sometimes when someone's sick and that those white blood cells have detected something like a bacteria or a virus, and they start dividing and they get very active. And that's why we say your lymph nodes are swollen, because you have a lot more white blood cells in that area. Go ahead. So yes, Lucy, the circulatory system is about blood flow. You do need to know the path of flow through the heart, through the body, as well as the arteries and veins, and things like that. Also, I wanted to make a note. I think I mentioned it to my 4th period, but I don't know if I mentioned my 3rd. Notice that in the review section, there is some information about like the difference between the structure. I meant to mention that today. It's not something huge, but I do want you to know that, because of the different areas that you're finding these blood vessels, arteries have thick walls because they have the pressure from your heart and you don't want an artery to burst. Whereas if you have a vein, the pressure from the heart's really low at that point, so they don't have any thick muscular walls. But instead, what they have are these valves, like one-way doors. So when the blood flows past it, basically it doesn't let the blood flow backwards too much, because gravity is a big issue there. You don't really have much pump from your heart. So Lucy, yes, you should know about parts of the blood. Let's see. Let's go back. Matthew's asking about the umbilical artery, cords, and veins. Essentially, that is fetal circulation. I didn't talk to you guys about it yet, so for this quiz, I don't need you to know fetal circulation. We're actually going to go over it really quickly on Monday or Tuesday of next week, so just don't worry about it for now. But simply put, it's how the fetus's blood interacts with the mother's blood, because a fetus can only get oxygen and get rid of waste through its umbilical cord. Nissa, I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. How does the lymphatic system help regulate homeostasis? Well, in this case, it's really going to help regulate homeostasis in this context of like blood pressure, but also like water balance, right? In the sense that like if you have more or less fluid flowing through your blood, that's going to affect things like your blood pressure and such. So the lymphatic system, because it's connected to your circulatory system, can help balance out those types of things, right? It can help put more fluid into your blood if you don't have enough fluid, or it can help take some fluid out if you have too much fluid. Janya asks, well, no, it's not a matter of what cavity, because this is not a pig quiz, right? I want you to make sure you know the circulatory and respiratory systems. So focus more on that as opposed to the cavity. Does that make sense? Like, I want you to know how the systems work, both of those systems. Where do the aorta and pulmonary artery connect into the heart? Okay, so both the aorta and pulmonary artery connect to ventricles. The right ventricle leads out of the heart and goes to the pulmonary artery. Remember, artery away, right? A away. And then, so that means it's going to go to the lungs. So in terms of connections, you would say right ventricle to pulmonary artery actually goes to the pulmonary valve, right? Which is a valve on the, between the pulmonary artery and the right ventricle. And then it goes to your lungs, right? And then it comes back to your left atrium. From there, it would go through the bicuspid valve to the left ventricle, from the left ventricle to the aorta, actually through the aortic valve, and then to the aorta, and then out to the body. Do I have to? So I would know. I don't need you to know all the. I mean, on some level, yes, you need to know blood sugar in the context of like that sugar is in the blood, and how that might change. But I'm not really worried about that. Like it's not the main thing. I think that's one place you could talk about the interaction between things like the digestive system and the circulatory system. But this focus of this quiz is really more on the circulatory system. Stefan, if you intake salt, will your kidneys filter out that excess? To an extent, it will, right? I mean, the kidneys, without getting super into the nephrons and how they work, it will probably to some extent filter out some of it, but not all of it. Basically, the cortex area has a certain concentration that helps draw water out of your kidneys or out of your blood. Or back into your bloodstream, things like that. I'm pretty sure your teacher doesn't need to know that excessively. I think just the big idea is to know that your body is using your kidneys to maintain water balance as part of homeostasis. Yes, you should know about cardiovascular disease and stuff like that. The key to the review sheet, I attached it to so someone had said that the review sheet, the first version I put up, was formatted kind of weird. So if you look in Google Classroom, there should be a second one. Let me see. Yeah, I know, I'm pretty sure I put it up. So look in Google Classroom, it should be there. Right after I get off here, I will basically recheck it and make sure. And if it's not posted, I'll post it. But I basically attached it as a second attachment. So in the reposted review sheet for circulatory and respiratory system, then you'll find a second, which is the answers. Good evening, Matthew. Okay, Janya, what if the aorta and pulmonary artery switched? Do you mean like if they're going to the wrong place? That would mean things aren't going to the right place, right? I mean, certainly things happen. But I mean, essentially when people's blood vessels are not going to the right area, right, then there's going to be potentially very serious complications. Hi, Carissa. You can ask any other questions too if you want, but I'll have to save those to the end. Matthew's asking, in the structure of the heart, do we have to remember? I do want you to know the structure of the heart. Yes, you should be able to tell me all the chambers, all the valves, the direction blood flows, as well as what it does, right?
Mommy, where's Carissa? I don't.
Carissa's right there. You can't see her. Okay, Carissa says hi, Gina.
Hi.
Okay. All right. What is plasma? So again, plasma is the liquid portion of your blood, right? If you think about it, if your blood was just cells, it would have no flow to it, right? It wouldn't be able to move. But instead, what you have is like a good portion of water. Like a lot of your blood is actually water. That's part of how it ties to the excretory system, because if you don't have enough water in your body, one of the things that can't really flow is your blood, right? So plasma is largely water. It's actually kind of like a light yellow colored water, straw colored fluid. And it contains things like dissolved salts, proteins, urea, waste, I mean, all sorts of things. It's sort of like all the other stuff that's in your blood that's not red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets is pretty much in your plasma. And so what it does is lots of different things, right? It's actually how you carry carbon dioxide. It's how you transport proteins. It has antibodies, which have immune system function. Lots and lots of, basically all those things. Like it just transports everything in your blood other than red blood cells and white blood cells and platelets. So a stroke and a heart attack. So an ischemic stroke, yes, can be caused by plaque in the arteries, right? But they're both essentially like, yeah. Thank you, Carissa. But a lot of times that's blockage of plaque, right? But remember, due to plaque buildup. Also remember there is a hemorrhagic stroke, which is more like essentially like a burst artery, and that's not going to be due to plaque building up. Let's see. Hold on. Svenya's asking, okay, so bronchi and bronchioles, basically bronchioles are smaller air tubes. I believe at the point at which you get to the bronchioles, they don't have any cartilage around them, but the bronchi still do. Emphysema is actually a disease when the alveoli are affected. Simply put, someone with emphysema, their alveoli can't like inflate. So think of it as like a balloon, but it can't inflate properly. What that means is you're really going to have a lot of trouble getting air because you can't really breathe in oxygen very well, right? And so it's not uncommon for someone with emphysema to have to use like an air oxygen mask where they're now delivering like pure oxygen to them, because the idea is if they're not going to get very much air into their lungs, period, they might as well get as much oxygen as they can. Do we have to know about blood sugar? Right. So Matthew, I said that earlier, which is essentially like, I just want you to know it in the very most general term. I'm not going to ask you about insulin and glucagon again, because I already, obviously that was already part of another quiz. So yes, it's a part of blood. I guess you could, maybe the most important part in this sense would be to say that it's part of, those hormones could be dissolved in the blood plasma. Past that, and that they control blood sugar. Janya, yes, Caressa was telling you it's when a blood vessel's blocked. So basically, your blood clots normally if you have like a cut, right? I mean, you've like sprouted a hole in a blood vessel. And so the platelets, along with clotting factors, would stop your blood from flowing, basically plug the hole so your blood doesn't like all the way flow out, right? So a blood clot is just that. Most of the time it's a positive thing for us, meaning it doesn't let our blood leak out. But in the case of things like heart attacks or strokes, right, it means that probably a plaque of some sort has ruptured. And remember, I sort of showed you in class that now that plaque, when it ruptured, your body gets confused and thinks it's supposed to plug that hole, but it's really not a hole. So now it plugs your artery by accident. Yes. Well, I mean, not all the diseases, but I think you should know the ones I talked to you about. The difference between internal bleeding and hemorrhaging, I think honestly, it's just a matter of the severity. Internal bleeding is anytime you have, bleeding inside the body, because you can't always see it, right? Like if someone has a cut, you can totally see that they're bleeding. But if someone has internal bleeding, sometimes you can't see that. And that's how it becomes more dangerous, right? Hemorrhaging is just like massive internal bleeding. Like it's a lot of internal bleeding, I believe. The lymphatic system how does the lymphatic system interact with the immune system? The lymphatic system has immune system cells in it, right? So in those lymph nodes, there are actually immune system cells hanging out in there. So that's a big part of sort of how they're connected to each other. Okay, let's see. Other questions? Make sure you can identify the structures, right? Even though it isn't a pig quiz, I still do expect you to know the structures of the respiratory and circulatory system. The wall between the right and left ventricle, I didn't actually mention it, so I don't really expect you guys to know it for tomorrow, but it's called the septum. Yes, Matthew, that's correct. Okay, and then Svenya's asking, okay, hopefully I didn't miss anything here. Why are chest wounds so serious? So think of it this way, as like what you want to have happen, right, is your diaphragm contracts, and it essentially it's like a suction, right, where it's going to suck the air into your lungs. But imagine if you had a chest wound, that essentially means you have a hole in your thoracic cavity. So now you actually don't have, you actually then don't have your, hi Sammy, you don't actually have that suction, and that's why chest wounds so dangerous, because they basically need to seal it up. Oh, thank you, baby. Okay. A heart valve, let's see.
Do you want me to lift you up?
Carissa, okay, so bios. Oh, no. Thank you, baby. Thank you, Sammy. Okay. Carissa, yeah. If it's a plus sign, it means it's a charged amino acid. Okay, go. Can you go with her, please? Thank you. Janya, yes, there's a septum in your nose too. Okay, Sammy, I need you to go, please. Okay, thank you. The function of a nephron.
To find our father.
Oh, sorry, I missed a question here. How are the excretory and circulatory system related? They're basically related because the function of your excretory system is to... Sammy, no, thank you. Sammy, don't. Thank you. You're going to knock over the chair. Thank you. So the excretory system essentially cleans out your blood. That's what happens. Okay? So that's how they're related, because the excretory system is responsible for filtering out the waste from your circulatory system. The function of a heart valve. So the heart valves are going to be your tricuspid, your bicuspid, and then your pulmonary and your aortic valves. And so those are what they do essentially is close off the different sections of your heart, right? So you could say that their basic function is twofold. Number one, they prevent backflow. So they don't let the blood flow backwards in your heart, because remember, blood is just a fluid, right? If it gets pushed one way, it's going to swirl around. It could theoretically go backwards, and you don't want it to do that. So one of the functions of the heart valves is to prevent backflow. The second one is because the blood flows in and then they shut, what it basically does is it allows you to fill a chamber with blood before you pump it to the next chamber. And when you do that, it allows it to actually have higher pressure. And in this sense, I mean in a good way, right? Because if your heart just kind of trickled the blood all the way through the 4 chambers, you would never really have a whole lot of push behind the blood to actually get it going. So by closing the door, essentially, filling the chamber and then pushing it all at the same time out of a chamber really allows it to have a little bit more pressure and push behind the blood. Let's see. I'm not sure if I answered the question about the nephron, so let me do that one for other students who are not mine. Again, don't worry, my students, you don't have to know the nephron. So the nephron is basically the individual filtering unit in the kidney. So when you have your blood flowing into your kidneys, the blood, it's sort of like divide and conquer, right? You have all this blood flowing into the kidney, and then imagine sending the blood into this factory where the blood gets split up into lots of different little rooms, and in each room, a little bit of the blood is filtered, so that together, collectively, you're filtering all of it, right? So a nephron is just the individual filtering unit that's going to take care of that small amount of blood and get rid of the waste. In which atrium does the blood flow in and out? So blood flows in and out of each atrium, right? Blood flows into the right atrium from the pulmonary artery, from the vena cava, right? And then it would go out of the right atrium through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. For the left atrium, it's coming in from the pulmonary vein, then going through the bicuspid valve to the left ventricle. What do lipids do in the blood? A big lipid in the blood is cholesterol, right? It's carried in the blood. So think of it as lipids may not do anything per se in the blood, but they are carried in the blood. So it could be the lipids that you've eaten and digested, and it's gone through the lacteals and then dumped into the circulatory system. It could also be cholesterol, which is a lipid, and that's going to be carried either from the cells to the liver or to the liver, or from the liver to the cells, but essentially cholesterol, which is a big part of the, big important part of what your body needs, cellular, for cell membranes, things like that. Atherosclerosis, yes, thank you, Carissa, is the buildup of plaque in the blood vessels. Remember, it doesn't have to cause a heart attack or stroke, but it could, right? And that's sort of the idea, is that when you have these fatty deposits, which we would call plaque, building up in the blood vessels, it narrows the passageway for blood to flow. And ultimately, because the plaque is not very stable, if that plaque ruptures, could trigger clot, which would then trigger a heart attack in the heart, which is in the coronary arteries, or if it's in a blood vessel to the brain, it would be a ischemic stroke. How many questions? To be honest, I'm still moving things around, so I don't know exactly how many questions. Maybe 20, 25, but I'm not sure. Anita, yes, lipids are carried in the blood, right? I mean, at first, in terms of digested lipids, at first they're carried from the lacteals, and then they go into the circulatory system later, like dump in later. But ultimately, yes, you are carrying lipids in your blood, and you'll take them to your, your liver, your cells, etc. Uh-oh. Okay. Other questions? No. Hey, you have to be quiet. No, if you're gonna stay here, you have to be quiet. Okay. So how you get laryngitis? Baby, stop, please. Are you gonna be quiet? No, don't do that, please. Okay. So you get laryngitis. Oh, sorry, guys. Okay, can you take her to daddy? Then you have to stop screaming. Thank you. Okay. You'll have the entire period for the test. How do you get laryngitis? Essentially, your vocal cords get inflamed, right? And so when your vocal cords get inflamed, careful. When your vocal cords get inflamed, then they get swollen. And if they're swollen, then they actually can't vibrate very well. And if they can't vibrate very well, unlike her, who is doing a very good job screaming. No, thank you, Sammy. No, thank you. No. Sammy. Okay. Sorry, guys. It's like a 3-ring circus here. There's a lot of reasons your vocal cords could get inflamed. It could be sickness. Samantha, stop. Stop, please. Okay. It could be sickness. It could also, someone has a cold or flu. It could also be that, Samantha, stop. This is not okay. You need to leave. Okay. It could also be overuse. Okay, Matthew, I will double check it and I will put it in there if it's not in there, okay? Sorry about that. So the causes of a heart attack, okay, the direct cause of a heart attack is that a coronary artery gets totally blocked. And when it does, no, baby, this is not okay. Thank you. Can you go get Ducky for me? Can you show them Ducky? No. Okay, then you have to be quiet, okay? Then go do that.
I want to show them squishy. I want to show them squishy.
Okay, you go get the squishy. Okay, go get them. Go get your squishies. Thank you. Maybe Sammy can help you. So yeah, essentially when a coronary artery gets blocked, that's a heart attack. But that could be, that could be a result of atherosclerosis, right? It's not like all of a sudden it just gets blocked. Typically, it's that over time, your coronary arteries are narrowing because of atherosclerosis. And then when that plaque ruptures, now you end up with total blockage. Again, I don't know how many questions. It's about 1.5, 2 pages. Similar in length to your digestive quiz. I'm still, readjusting things. So length may change depending on, how I move the questions around. it's not that I want you to describe how the lungs of a smoker or non-smoker look per se. It's the idea that I want you to understand what smoking does to one's lungs, right? So the idea that the tar, the carcinogens, all that stuff gets trapped and really messes up one's lungs. No, a heart attack doesn't cause a stroke and a stroke doesn't cause a heart attack. They're two separate things, right? But the idea would be, okay, hold on one second. No, wait, please. The idea is that, whoa, sorry. So the idea is that if you are prone to a heart attack or stroke, right? I mean, in both cases, you probably have atherosclerosis, so you're probably at risk for both. Hold on. Oh, Sammy, be careful, please.
Sorry.
Thank you. Guys, if you knock over my computer, we have nothing to do. Okay.
Hello.
Okay.
Halloween.
Okay, yeah, Anita. So Matthew, Anita's telling you how to get there. There's a small chance that it's not in both assignments because I think when I reposted the second assignment, careful, Sammy. Anyway, I'll put it in there, Matthew. Okay. The medulla oblongata is actually part of your brainstem. Your brainstem is actually the part that's really the most primitive part of your brain, so it's controlling really very basic functions like breathing and heartbeat. Oh, okay. You guys need to go somewhere else. Thank you. I need you to know just nicotine and vaping in the most basic sense, right? Understanding what it is, where it goes, what it does, right? The idea that you have nicotine. Okay. You need to leave, please, right now. No, you cannot. Okay? Gina, can you go get your father for me? Go get your father right now. Okay, sorry, guys. We're going to have the kids go outside because they're being way too loud. Okay, no. No, thank you. No, then you need to be quiet. Can you be quiet? Okay. So vaping is essentially, I want you to know the idea that vaping contains nicotine, that it contains, Samantha, stop, please. Okay, sorry guys, we're just going to take a second here. We're going to remove the kids because they're really being too loud. Okay? You can come back in 5 minutes. Go, please. You can come back in 5 minutes or not at all. Okay, sorry guys. They're very excited to see you all, but they get a little too excited. Okay, sorry, Matthew. So nicotine and vaping, I just want you to know the really basic information, which is to say that vaping does contain nicotine, that it is, going to have, the same potential effects in a lot of ways as traditional smoking, maybe just without the tar, but certainly it has the carcinogenic chemicals and things like that. Let's see. Okay, yeah, she is answering that. Let's say an artery in your foot gets completely blocked with plaque. Yeah, I mean, okay, so first of all, the arteries leading to your foot are much larger, right? So the chance of it getting blocked, of course, are lower. But essentially, anytime you cut off circulation or blood flow to any area, those cells would basically start to die, right? I mean, without oxygen, those cells die. So someone would, essentially have massive cell death in their foot and such.
Mommy, I just need to get my squishy.
Okay, get your squishy. Thank you. Go, please. No, go. Thank you. The red band. Okay, I think what you're asking is when you look at blood, right? If it's full blood, like it's whole blood and it's not centrifuged, then it is basically looks all mixed together, right? But when you centrifuge it, then the bottom portion, which you see is red, is your red blood cells. And then in the middle, you see this whitish band, that's your white blood cells and your platelets. And then the top yellowish colored liquid is your plasma. Again, I don't need you to know a ton about the lymphatic system. I need you to know only the lymphatic system in the context that I talked about it in the circulatory lecture. Does that make sense? Like, that's it. So don't overstress the lymphatic system. It's like a small section. Asthma. So asthma is essentially when your bronchioles, there are muscles that surround your bronchioles and they constrict, meaning they get narrower. And so that means you're not going to be able to pass as much air through your lungs, specifically your bronchioles. And so you have trouble breathing, right? So if you know someone who has asthma, one of the things that they often take is an inhaler. And that inhaler is medicine that's going to relax those muscles. So it opens up their airways and lets more air back into their lungs. It's also one of those things where they've now learned that part of asthma is your bronchioles actually get a little bit swollen and inflamed. So sometimes I'll give you a second medication to kind of help bring down that swelling. Caressa, yeah, technically you should know the 3 sites in the ribosome. Okay. Oh, Matthew, you were asking, well, do we have to describe what smoking does? Again, I want you to know what smoking does in the context of how it affects your lungs. Things like it paralyzes the cilia, that the tar and the molecules get in there, that there are carcinogens that will potentially then cause things like lung cancer. That's sort of the extent to which I would want you to know it. I want you to know the heart diagram. Yes, I would say you should be able to look at a heart diagram and tell me where the where all the chambers are, where all the valves are, the flow of blood, etc. Let's see. When they reroute the flow of blood after a heart attack, where do they get? Oh, okay, good question. So what they actually do is there's a vein in your leg called a saphenous vein, and my understanding is they actually take a little piece of that. Think about it also, your heart's not, the coronary arteries aren't that big, so they probably don't have to take a ton of this vein, but I think they essentially harvest a small section of the vein and use it to build like this detour around the blocked area. Anika, red blood cells, white blood cells, and plasma. Yes, so red blood cells carry oxygen. White blood cells are for immune system function, and plasma is for carrying everything else that's not cells. Okay. Lucy, don't worry about EPA. Caressa's actually in my AP Bio class, so she's just asking questions about their test tomorrow, so you don't have to know about that. So in a heart attack, when the plaque begins to build, does the body think it's a puncture? Kind of. So essentially think of it as in a heart attack, you have this plaque, right? And it's like it's covered by this really flimsy layer. So what'll happen sometimes, especially with higher blood pressure, which is often associated also with heart attacks, but not always, it's like the plaque film breaks. And so it's almost like there's like a hole in the plaque. But then the body thinks that rupture is actually like a rupture in your blood vessel wall. So it sends along all your clotting stuff to clog the hole, right? The problem now is it's going to clog a hole that's not there and inadvertently then clogs your coronary artery instead. Okay, there are some screaming children outside. Okay, other questions? So atherosclerosis only occurs in arteries because it's often the result of damage to the blood vessel walls, right? So think of it as like, so if we go backwards a step, we know that arteries are always leading away from your heart. If they're leading away from your heart, then they're going to have really high pressure because that's where the most push from your blood is, which means think of it as sort of like if you have your blood flowing with a lot of push, think of it as like a garden hose, right? If you have the garden hose and it's just trickling water, versus if it's like spraying water really hard, more likely it's going to actually going to potentially damage the inner lining of your blood vessel walls. And that's what starts atherosclerosis, because when you have damage now to the inner lining of your walls, of the blood vessel walls, that's where the plaque starts to build up. And so with a vein, you really wouldn't have that because you don't have that amount of pressure, right? So the role that cholesterol plays in atherosclerosis is essentially it's somewhat of what it's cholesterol and other fatty deposits are what's building up in the plaque. So you could say the plaque's partially made of cholesterol, I guess you could say. Caressa, it disrupts translation because it doesn't allow the ribosome to bind to the mRNA. On a plaque surgery, which is more safe, the balloon surgery or cut a vessel. I don't know that one is more safe than the other. I think it just depends. I'm not sure what you mean about cutting a vessel. Essentially, the idea is that if they want to get rid of the plaques, they could sometimes use like a corkscrew and like kind of drill it out, or they could use like a balloon to like squish it all to the side. Either way, it's not going to be, too. I think they do it carefully, right? There's always risks so inherent in there. How do you tell the difference between a vein, artery, and capillary if you're just looking at your arm? You can't tell just looking at your arm. You would have to look at the cross section of them. So an artery would have much thicker walls. A vein, like think about your pigs, right? In your pulmonary artery versus your superior and inferior vena cava, you could see that pulmonary artery was like really thick, right? It was really hard. When you pushed on it, it didn't really have much give to it. Whereas your superior vena cava almost looked like really flat and soft, right? Like very thin. And then your capillaries, you actually probably wouldn't even see the capillaries. They're so tiny, so that would be a big difference too. And they have really thin walls because that's where gas exchange and exchange of materials has to happen. Ryan, 45 questions. Guys, that's not for you. That's for my AP Bio students. So 45 multiple choice. Where would the doctor take blood vessels what do you mean where they take them? They don't take it anywhere. They would just try to clear it, right? The idea is like if it starts a clog in there, they would try to smush the plaque to the side. Matthew, you don't need to know about the clotting system. Just know that platelets are involved in the clotting process. Past that, I don't need to know anything else. There is a whole like complicated pathway, but you don't need to know that. Yes, Lucy, thank you. Yes, so veins go to the heart. Mr. Gann actually gave me a good way to remember it. Think of like vein, the word in is in the word vein. So veins go into the heart, whereas arteries, A for away. If capillaries burst, then often that's a bruise, right? So, I mean, if capillaries burst, it's like any other blood vessel, the clotting will try to happen. But it's not uncommon that you probably could, like if you have force or something like that, that you would break capillaries. What is the connection between high blood pressure and heart disease and sudden cardiac arrest? So sudden cardiac arrest is something essentially your heart stops beating properly, right? I mean, that's not usually I suppose it could be linked to high blood pressure. It's probably more likely to be related to heart disease because the idea is high blood pressure causes, again, damage to blood vessel walls, and then that could lead to atherosclerosis, which could then lead to a heart attack. Your blood would technically become more acidic when you're holding your breath because the idea is that the acid in your blood comes from a intermediate step of carbon dioxide. So if you can't get rid of your carbon dioxide because you're holding your breath, then in theory you would have more acid in your blood so that the pH would go down. Capillaries are just really small blood vessels. They are where you exchange materials between your cells and your blood in your circulatory system. So for example, you have capillaries that surround your alveoli, you have capillaries that are inside the villi of the digestive system. So they're also all over your body. So it's just anywhere you're going to need to have sort of that exchange between body cells and your blood vessels. Anika, yeah, for my students, you only need to know the respiratory system and the cardiovascular system. For Mr. H's students, you need to know the excretory system. Matthew, arteries are blood vessels. Atrium is the chamber in your heart. So, yes, Anika's correct. Any other questions? We're going to have to wrap this up soon. So, but I'll take any last questions you might have. And again, as always, if you have questions, you're welcome to email me tonight and I'll check them as well. Did I miss anybody's questions? Hopefully I got them all. Yes, ventricles are the bottom chambers. Hi, Christine. I actually did the AP Bio review last night. But if you have questions and I'm here, go ahead and fire away. Okay, anything else? It's okay. Christine, if you do have questions, I'll go ahead and just ask them. So, Caressa, the reason a microRNA disrupts translation is because, remember, it's a small piece of RNA that binds to another piece of RNA, right? But if you have a double-stranded piece of RNA, then it can't bind to the ribosome and you can't translate it. Yes, I can explain plasma and platelets again. So plasma, remember, is the liquid portion of your blood. It's mostly water, but it contains things like proteins and antibodies and hormones and all sorts of things, right? So you could think of the plasma as the way to carry everything else other than your white blood cells and your red blood cells. Yes, red blood cells carry oxygen, and then platelets are actually involved in that clotting reaction you were asking about. So just for our purposes, Matthew, just know that the platelets are involved in clotting your blood, but I don't know what you know past that. Will we need to know what other places the blood goes through before getting to the other chamber? Yes. I mean, essentially, I want you to know the path of blood flow, right? White blood cells don't carry anything. No, they're for immune system function. They basically help you fight disease. So, but Janya, yes, I want you to know the full pathway of blood flow. You should be able to tell me how the blood flows through every chamber, every valve. Yes, Sammy. Through every, yes, it has been 5 minutes. You may come back and say hi. But saying hi means doesn't mean making goofy noises, okay? Okay, thank you. Yes, a good thing to practice would be to practice the full range. Oh my goodness, okay. White blood cells, okay, so Svenja, yes, red blood cells don't have a nucleus. It's not a huge deal for you to know that, but just in case you wondered, the reason they don't actually have a nucleus is in the process of their development, they want to be able to carry as much oxygen as they can. So as a way to save more space, they squeeze out their nucleus. Matthew, should we know the relationship between the circulatory and excretory systems? Very generally, yes. I mean, actually, I'm not going to ask you about the excretory system, so I don't really need you to know that, but it's always good to know in general, right? White blood cells do have a nucleus, yes. Yes, you should know the pathway of the airflow from the trachea, or actually from the outside, right, all the way to the alveoli. Do you need to learn the organelles? I would know the basic functions of organelles. I wouldn't make it a huge thing for AP Bio students. Janya, no, the ventricles are not connected. There's actually a wall between them, which is that septum. So there's no connection between the right and left ventricles.
Mommy?
Yes.
Kina is in this class.
The students are in her class, but she might not be watching right now.
Because she's at dance, maybe?
Maybe. Okay. Do we have to know the alveoli and how oxygen? That's pretty much what I need to know about it, yes. If you just know that the alveoli are surrounded by blood capillaries and oxygen diffuses from the lungs into the blood, and then CO2 from the blood into the lungs, that's sufficient. No, remember I decided that after talking to a couple people, other teachers and such, that it just didn't make sense for the project to happen right now, just because it's too much work at this point and it wouldn't be worth your time. So for now, no. I mean, we are going to talk about ways we can, make the final go better. But I think at this point, it doesn't make sense to do the project, especially when it's not something I know enough about to be able to guide you properly in. Do we need to know about fetal circulation? You do not need to know fetal circulation for this quiz. We are going to talk about fetal circulation on Monday or Tuesday, but for this quiz, no. How do I stop confusing artery and atrium? To be honest, I would remember that arteries are blood vessels, right? They're the tubes, and then the atrium is a chamber of your heart. So I don't know if this is going to help or not, but in houses sometimes, big houses, sometimes they have sort of a opening, like a like a place where people first come into the door. Thank you. That's Gina. Do you have to go ask her about that? I don't know. So you can think of it like an atrium is like a room, right? Okay. Any last questions? You're welcome. Sorry again for all the extra chaos. I would just know very basics about the spleen as it applies to the circulatory system, right? That it filters blood, that it's where you store extra blood, things like that. But nothing too much past that. Caressa, you should know the trip and lac operons from your notes. Correct, Janya. For my students, again, Mr. H's students, excretory system, yes. For my students, none of the urogenital stuff is included, correct. All right. Last call for questions. Otherwise, I'm going to go get my little ones to sleep. Sammy, do you want to come say goodbye?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so.
Goodbye.
Okay, say goodbye, Sammy.
Goodbye.
Okay. Okay, so AP Bio real fast. You're welcome, guys. Anytime. Just email me if you have questions. Okay, so AP Bio, what is the difference between alpha plated sheet? So alpha, it's not an alpha plated sheet. It's actually an alpha helix. Okay, thank you, Sammy. The alpha helix and the beta pleated sheet are both levels of secondary structure, so they're both formed by pattern. I'm almost done. I just have to answer one more question. Okay, they're both formed by patterns of hydrogen bonds between amino acids, usually in a very systematic pattern, and they're usually between not the R groups, but like the amino and carboxyl groups, and so they are types of secondary structure. But that's the main difference between them. It's just because of the way the patterns form. In one, you get like a corkscrew kind of shape. Yes, you may in just a second. And then in the beta plate sheet, it kind of looks like a folded piece of paper, right? Kind of like a fan. Okay. We're good? Yes? Okay, Sammy, say bye-bye one last time.
Mommy, are you done yet?
I am done.
Oh, goodbye.
Say good night. Say good night. Tell the students get some sleep tomorrow, okay?
Get some sleep tomorrow.
Or tonight, yeah? All right. All right, guys. I will see you all tomorrow. Like I said, I'll be up late. Yes, Caressa, go to sleep. Say, Caressa, go to sleep.
Caressa, go to sleep.
Okay. All right. I will talk to you all tomorrow, but email me if you have questions, all right?
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.